Sexton trying to get loose. He'll fire. Hey! Knocks it down. Okoro slammed it home. Garland upstairs. Oh! Sexton inside. A thunderous dunk.
And Allen blocked the shot at the rim.
Welcome to the Chase Down Podcast, part of the Cavs Media family. I'm your host, Justin Rowan. Support for this podcast and the following message comes from Zoom. 500,000 businesses connect using Zoom, a single platform for phone, chat, workspaces, events, apps, and video. Zoom enables real-time collaboration for teams around the globe. Zoom, how the world connects. And connecting with me now, live on Zoom, is not my co-host, Carter Rodriguez. He's bailing. He's not here to stick around the tough times when Darius Garland is out and Garland and LeVert is out. Instead, I am joined by one of the co-hosts of the greatest of all talk podcasts, the only podcast that I actually pay for, Andrew Sharp. Andrew, welcome back to the podcast. It's good to talk to you, man.
It's good to be here. It feels long overdue. A big year for our Cavaliers. And I do feel bad because like a month or two back, this would have been more of a celebration. I feel like it's sort of an anxious time for the Cavs right now. I mean, more than anything, I think we can call this like a prayer circle for Darius Garland's lower back and the nerve endings in there. I don't know if you have any incense we can light, but I mean, watching the game Saturday night really underscored how valuable he is because man, oh man, you remove him from the equation. That is a rough watch, and they're good players, but man, they needed some creation.
Apparently, the Tuesday practice that the Cavs had was just a brutal one for them. Both losing Garland and LeVert with a rolled ankle, and I guess Garland must have re-aggravated it because he looked fine heading into the All-Star break and on All-Star weekend. And maybe this was just kind of two games that the Cavs felt, hey, we can get Garland some rest. Let's try to get him right because we have Charlotte, Philadelphia, Toronto later in the week, and we need him to be right for those games. But you're right, it completely changed the complexion of this matchup. And I tried to get you on the podcast earlier this year, and you suggested, hey, we'll do it after a Wizards game. And given the way both these teams started, you would have thought that, hey, this is like an important game. This has play-in implications. And not only did the Wizards go off the rail, this is a very, very different Cavs team than even a week ago.
Yeah, I mean, it's pretty wild. The Wizards, even when they were starting hot, I wasn't super confident that they were going to be able to sustain that pace. The Cavs have kept it together for almost the entire season, and it's unfortunate because in most years, the East is so weak, like past the 6th seed. You can basically do whatever you want, and like you're going to make the playoffs. But now, I mean, it's a pretty... like competitive field out there, and I don't know. I mean, they really have to be careful and can't afford to drop too many more games because the Celtics are coming, and even teams like the Nets are sort of lurking there, and all these teams are separated by like 2 or 3 games right now. So the Cavs are going to have to work their asses off to make this to at least like keep their foothold in the middle of the conference and keep this season a success.
As a Cavs believer and a member of Garland Island, are you concerned about them falling into the plan? Because it is definitely like hit my radar. I'm at a kind of a level of somewhat concern, or I at least acknowledge it as a realistic possibility. But I haven't gotten into the same kind of rabbit hole spirals yet. I know Carter has, and he's been messaging me for some therapy late at night. But I'm not quite there yet. Where are you at?
Well, I'm not there yet either. And it's funny, even as I was like explaining how, you got to keep that foothold and make this season successful. Like this season is a success regardless of whether they end up in the play-in or not. I think on some level it's house money. Obviously, making the Garland and LeVert deal sort of puts pressure on them to accomplish things this season. But even if they end up in the play-in, I don't think that's a reflection on like what the team ceiling is going forward and even what they've accomplished this year. I mean, the reality is there are like 8 really good teams in the East, and you can even throw in a team like the Hawks who can be really good on any given night. And I wouldn't be that like depressed if all of it nets out to them having a one and out play-in situation, because the main thing is like you got proof of concept with Garland this year, with Mobley, and even with Mobley next to Jared Allen. Like there are so many positives coming out of this season that at the end of the day, if it ends with them in eighth place and getting bounced from the playoffs without ever actually playing in a series, like that's the worst case scenario. And there's still a lot of reason to be pumped after that season.
Yeah, not to channel my inner Gulliver because Ben is a lunatic, but I've been like trying to stay in the present here. And like, this is a big thing, both with basketball and life over the pandemic. I feel like I'm just trying to deal with whatever's directly ahead of me. And I'm just not going into that spiral of what's going to happen if they like slide, if there's like a 6-7 game losing streak and all of a sudden they're in the play-in, and then you don't have the cushion when you're going into these games against Philadelphia and Toronto and Chicago. To me, if they are resting guys and they lose some games and then all of a sudden they don't have that cushion going into those games, those are going to be playoff-like environments down the stretch where Garland, Okoro, LeVert, Allen, Mobley, all these guys are going to be playing the most meaningful basketball of their career. And win, lose, or draw, I think that's going to be very valuable experience for them. And realistically, looking at 22 games left, like the other teams behind them have difficult schedules too. Like Toronto is about to play a back-to-back against Brooklyn. That's going to get some losses in the mix for those play-in teams. You have those head-to-head games, and it would certainly be disappointing. But at the same time, I'm not going to cross that bridge until that bridge is actually ahead of me. It sucks. It's frustrating in the moment. But my big thing is, and if I wanted to go full like Cavs Andy Lou here, I'd be pushing the Garland MVP campaign right now. This is what they look like without Darius Garland. It's night and day difference. They're a contender with him. They're a lotto team without him, blah, blah, blah. I don't think that's true. I think this team and the guys that they have, the personnel they have right now, can play better than they have. They beat Charlotte with less than they had because they didn't have LeVert and Garland in that game. They didn't have Lowry either, who has made a big difference these last two games. To me, the biggest difference is Jetty was bad against the Pistons. He's good against the Wizards. Jared Allen against the Pistons, like 12-9 versus the 18-14 performance he put up against Washington. Kevin Love is a combined 2 of 15 over his last two games. If you're getting Sixth Man of the Year, Kevin Love, that is a totally different conversation than the Kevin Love that they've had the last couple of games here.
Yeah, I mean, my issue is just watching them in the first half against the Wizards last night. They would have certain possessions where I'd be like, well, I don't know how the hell you're supposed to score if you have nobody who can get it to Jared Allen and nobody who can get it to Mobley. And it's a credit to Garland. He makes those pick and rolls look so easy, and he's so creative. And he's a threat with his little floater, which I love. And it's all been more effective than it probably should be when you look at the team on paper, in part because the bigs have been really great playing off each other, and Garland is like borderline perfect as a creator at the center of everything. And I think guys like Dean Wade and Jetty and Okoro, they are solid, but they are not guys who are, I would say, playoff caliber like role players.
They're not the straw that stirs the drink, right? Like they don't compromise the defense a whole lot.
Yeah, and even as like supporting characters, like they're just not good enough, and I don't think that they're gonna be like long-term pieces. I mean, Okoro, you watch him more often than I do, but he's someone I've tried to get excited about at like several different junctures. And there's so many Cavs games where I'm just like, well, so what does this guy actually do? And he's a solid defensive player, but like, I'm just not really sure that he's like a starting caliber player ever. And right now, when you remove like Rondo and Garland, like they kind of need him to do a lot, and they're counting on Brandon Goodwin to do a lot. So it's a little dicey.
I find Okoro to be one of the more kind of confusing players to evaluate. Like, I think in a perfect world or even a healthy situation for the Cavs, I don't think he would be starting. I mean, there's a reason why they started the year with Sexton at the shooting guard position. You needed a little more ball handling. You needed some juice offensively. But Okoro, like, he's a bit of a lineup completer. Like, I know Basketball Index has him as one of the better on-ball defenders in the league, but the offense is just such a low volume where he very rarely has 10 field goal attempts in a game. There's been opportunities for him to initiate at times, but the handle just isn't there yet. It's nice to see that the shooting splits have improved from his rookie year, going from 42% from the floor to 47%, going from 30 or 29% from three to 33%. But it's still at such a low volume that it's hard to feel great about that. Like you still kind of feel like there's some noise, and he's just, I don't know what to make of him because I think his floor is high. I think he can be a rotation player just because his defense is that good. But I don't necessarily see the offensive upside that had Larry Nance before this season saying that he felt like he had the highest ceiling out of any of the Cavs core. Like, to me, I just don't really see that kind of upside with him, at least at this point. But he is a hard worker. He's someone that seems to relish doing the little things. It's just when you have all of these guards out and you need a little more juice, you'd like to see him be a little less stagnant. You'd like to see him contribute in other ways that he just hasn't to this point in his career.
Yeah, well, and this is like, because I believe in Garland and because I believe in Mobley, I really think like the Cavs over the next 5 to 7 years have as high a ceiling as anyone in the league, and that's why, like, if they do end up in the play-in game, my attitude as a Wizards fan is like, who gives a shit? Like, I would trade places in a heartbeat with the Cavs over the next 5 years. Like, what does it matter?
Mm-hmm.
And I do think that one of the challenges going forward is gonna be like accurate self-appraisal and being really honest about how many of these guys do you see as like long-term fits, and where do we need to improve? And I think you do, like, on the wings, they just have to figure out ways to acquire like one or two more pieces that can really fit.
They need a real small forward. At some point, this team needs a real small forward.
And Okoro, like, could maybe be that guy, but I'm just not quite sold. And Garland, I mean, you've been watching him every single game. I'm curious, like, how worried are you about the back? Because even before he went out, I would see him look kind of gimpy for like the month beforehand.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm actually glad that he's resting because it seemed like something wasn't right there. But like, what are you hearing in terms of long-term prognosis?
Yeah, I mean, new Cavs general manager Mike Gainsey was on the radio talking about it, where it's frustrating. I mean, he suffered it in that game against the Warriors. Clearly, didn't look right. Was playing through some pain. Had those good games against Sacramento where he wasn't really taking a shot, but he had a bunch of assists. Got his first triple double against Utah. But when you're dealing with the strain and that kind of like a minor back injury, it's just something that can feel good some days and flare up other days. And like, it's frustrating because that's not the kind of thing that you can realistically get the kind of rest you need in season to fix that, but it's nothing structural. So I feel good from that perspective, but it is disappointing that it's gone on for as long as it has, where this is just probably going to be a bit of a nagging thing for the rest of the season, where there will be games where he feels great and other games where, okay, had a practice where it just happened to flare up and we're going to need to rest you here, or we're going to have to pick our spots when to rest you. So it's not something that concerns me long term, but it definitely impacts the way I view this season and the upside that they can have this year. But you know, it's, if you're looking at historical omens, Cavs point guard getting injured against Golden State usually leads to good things down the road. So I've at least got that in my back pocket.
Oh man, well, I'll keep my fingers crossed. Back injuries freak me out because that's one of the only areas on the body where, like, doctors are still basically guessing, like brain injuries and backs. They're just like, well, try this. I don't know. And like surgery is usually a bad idea. So
he did rule that out though, at least on the radio. He said this isn't something that like there's a possibility that it will require an operation. Like this is just strictly kind of a rest and treatment thing. And they're just kind of being cautious. And I think like personally, it's frustrating to drop that game against Detroit, but it makes sense to me to rest him against Detroit and Washington. Like those are games that they should win. And if they don't play up to the level that they should in those games and they make their path the rest of the way more difficult, that's something you can learn from, right? Like that, hey, we need to bring a more consistent level of play to the table. We need to find ways to play without Garland, whether that means, okay, in those spots, we're going to have Mobley initiate a little more, and we're going to learn how to play off of him out of the high post, have him kind of do some big-to-big passing. Like, they need to not like I think from a basketball philosophy perspective, I like teams that have guys, 3-4 guys that can initiate at all times. It's one of the things I really admired about the Warriors. I don't want this to be a heliocentric Harden and Houston type thing with Garland that just is a stats factory for him. I do think that there's a value that can be found in these stretches. It's just, hey, if they don't rise to the occasion and they make their path more difficult than it needs to be, then they need to, down the stretch, go out and actually win some of those tougher games and maybe steal one or two against a contender.
Yeah, well, and that's definitely the reason I'm most excited about the future is Garland's ability to play off the ball, and then whether it's Karis LeVert or Colin Sexton or some wing creator that doesn't exist yet, like I think that is the version of the Cavs offense that is going to be scariest. And when you pair it with the defense, I mean, it was wild watching like Raul Neto try to get a shot off around the rim last night. And like you get past Jared Allen and then you've got Mobley on the weak side and it just looks like a goddamn nightmare for like anybody who.
And then you got Lowry Legend out there, just with his length and his shooting. Okay.
Lowry, man.
Gotta love him.
I will tell you one thing. Yeah. I looked up Lowry's agent's name. His name is Michael Lelchitsky, and that guy deserves some kind of award for securing the bag for Lowry last year. And look, he's not terrible, but watching him can be awful frustrating as I'm imagining like what this Cavs team should look like.
It's remarkable though, like even on nights where he's not hitting shots, the difference he makes in that 3 big lineup versus Mobley and Allen without him is ridiculous just because they don't have that depth at the small forward position. They don't have a guy that can actually stretch the defense. So for him to come out and hit some big shots there was a lot of fun. I do need to ask, so we talked about the frustrating aspects of Okoro. There was the other side of that coin too down the stretch in the fourth quarter where he played really, really good defense on Kuzma and it kind of slowed him down. Actually, but before we get to Okoro's defense, what is the deal with Kuzma against the Cavs? What is his beef and why is he... I looked it up. For the season, he's shooting 57-57 against the Cavs, and that's including a 12-point performance that he had in the second matchup. Like, this guy has been, for 3 games against the Cavs, he has just been a human torch, and I need to know what the beef is there.
Oh my God. I'm glad you mentioned that because I don't know how many of your listeners watch like literally every Cavs game. And so some people may not have watched Cavs Wizards on Saturday night. Maybe you had something more exciting to do with your Saturday night. I can't imagine anything better than Cavs Wizards on a Saturday.
Of course.
But for anybody who missed it, Kyle Kuzma for the first 3 quarters was like Game 6 Klay Thompson. Everything he put up was cash, and I think he definitely had more than 30. I think he had like 8 threes. It was a career high in made threes for him. Do I know why Kyle Kuzma is constantly torching the Cavs? I don't. Was it like borderline surreal watching him just get whatever he wanted? It was incredible. It was one of those things where like it's the magic of the regular season is you'll just see random stuff like that. And
it's almost like a Wiggins like beef, because he was throwing shots after the first game where he said they're nothing without LeBron, and he hit that game winning shot that drove me absolutely nuts because Okoro got hurt the possession or two before and wasn't out there to defend. Like he seems to have a little extra fire in his belly, and it's just such a weird random rivalry, and I don't know what the root cause is, but I would like him to just take it easy. It's an 82 game season. You can give a B+ performance against the Cavs instead of going supernova.
Oh man, I'm so grateful to him because I was watching the first quarter and thinking to myself, like, I don't know if I can make it through a full Wizards game with this roster. But Kuzma spiced it up just enough. And then I was grateful for the fourth quarter collapse where they just forgot how to score, because ultimately I'm now rooting for ping pong balls. And so like a spirited 3 quarters, some fun Kuzma shot making, and a loss was exactly what I was looking for from that game. And I'm happy for the Cavs too, because I mean, that one would have been a really tough L to swallow and would have been sort of like an ominous sign. So yeah, I mean, Okoro started to put it together in the second half, Lowry hitting shots, like all of that was sneaky big for the second half of this Cavs season.
Yeah, and I think it certainly helped that Washington went to double overtime the night before. You were hoping for some tired legs. I thought Kuzma would be tired from the night before, and yeah, you're probably going to get just like an ugly shooting game, and the Cavs can kind of grind it out with defense and come away with a solid enough win. And they just managed to hit tough shots. Like even KCP hit some tough shots, and Neto hit a tough shot down the stretch, and it was frustrating. But to me, that's the other side of the coin with Okoro, where there have been games where he will just go out there and shut someone's water off, and he'll make them work. The game against Brooklyn where the Cavs won, Kyrie was dapping him up after the game, like, hey, like you defended the living hell out of me, and like really had the game clinching play, breaking up a pass to Harden and getting the dunk. So there are those moments where it's like, okay, the defense that he brings on ball really, really makes a big impact, especially when he has the help behind him from Mobley and Allen. It's just, do you have enough juice around him? And I think the answer could be yes, if, down the road he adds a little bit to his game offensively. If Mobley continues to grow offensively, Garland gets more comfortable, maybe you find a small forward. But at the end of the day, like in the short term, I'd probably end up going with LeVert starting at shooting guard, just because I think they need that dribbling once he's healthy, and then kind of do the Sexton thing where you sub out LeVert quickly. You have Okoro come in and have LeVert run a little bit of the second unit. But I do think against the better teams, which the Cavs are going to have quite a few of those games down the stretch, I think against the better teams, you need to have multiple guys that can at least create for themselves. Like even if LeVert isn't efficient, just someone that's going to compromise the defense makes a big difference, in my opinion.
Yeah, well, and for long stretches of this season, it's been Garland doing like everything, and that doesn't seem like it's going to be sustainable. So adding LeVert as just like another look you can throw at defenses, and you can allow Garland to play off the ball and sort of catch his breath a little bit, is a good idea, certainly for the short term. So are you drinking the Karras Kool-Aid, let's call it? Are you in on him as like a long-term piece, or is that still a wait and see situation?
I'm pretty wait and see for every player not named Garland, Allen, and Mobley. Like, I think they're in a position where all of these guys can get minutes. I think there's the opportunity for internal competition. I don't think any of these guys really take away. Like, if they're fully healthy, I think there's plenty of minutes for LeVert, Okoro, Sexton, and Garland. I think that can work. I think maybe Jetty would lose some time, and maybe LeVert slides over to the 3 in some lineups. Like, I think there's some versatility there. But I haven't really penciled anybody in for the long term because I need to see how Sexton looks when he comes back from injury. I need to see if LeVert can stay healthy and if he can blend into what the Cavs are doing. I need to see what growth Okoro makes. Like he's a notoriously hard worker and a guy that just kind of grinds the same level as Sexton. And I'm not comfortable writing a 21-year-old off. But in terms of who I'm penciling in, it's really just those three guys, and let's see who blossoms alongside them, who develops a good chemistry. And I'm kind of rooting for everybody because I think if everybody's playing well alongside them, it opens up the possibility for a consolidation move down the road. And then when you're discussing who to give up, it depends on who a team values. Like some teams might value Sexton over Okoro or vice versa, or some teams might really value Lowry or want Jetty Osman out there as someone coming in off the bench. Like there's a lot of directions for the Cavs to go. I just don't feel like they are in a position where they need to be rushed to make those decisions before a guy goes out and earns it.
Yeah. I mean, it would be crazy to like pencil Karras in as like a cornerstone piece alongside Garland and Mobley. So there's no question about that. I think the reason I ask is because like I've just never been a Karras guy, or I was when he was coming into the draft and coming into the league. I was excited. And then
he broke your heart.
Couple years. He just like he can't stay healthy, and he is so ball dominant, and I'm just not sure like the juice is worth the squeeze with him. But at the same time, like they needed somebody, and I wasn't a big Jared Allen guy when they traded for Jared Allen and were planning to re-sign him, and I wound up looking like a complete moron at the end of all that. So maybe I'm wrong about Karras too, and we'll see what it turns into. Another question I have for you as we have our little Cavs summit here. So what is the best version of Evan Mobley on offense? Because I'm not sure what his game on that end is going to look like. I mean, he's like so incredible defensively that he is a cornerstone regardless and figures to be like an all NBA guy throughout his prime. But I also, it reminds me of Giannis, where like people had Giannis as a small forward and then they were like, oh, he's a point guard. Oh, he's a center. And they just like, he was sort of figuring it out as he went. And I sort of it seems like Mobley is doing some of that as well. And I wonder what you think as you watch him night in and night out.
I think so. Part of why I was really big on adding Jared Allen is long-term, or like re-signing Jared Allen is long-term. I view Evan Mobley as a power forward. Like I think that is the best spot to kind of preserve him, to avoid him taking too many lumps and bruises throughout the course of a regular season. And I think it also enables him to kind of freewheel and play free safety and be like a little bit of Draymond on the defensive end, where he's just everywhere, right? Disrupting guys. I think from an offensive perspective and where I see him going is a lot of creation out of the high post. Like I think you're going to be able to run some offense through him, have him be that outlet for Garland. They are already very effective with the double drag with Garland, Allen, and Mobley. I think we'll continue to see them build off of those kind of sets, but I don't necessarily think he's going to be like a go-to offensive option. I think there's going to be a lot of offense that involves him having the ball in his hands at some point. But I do think that they're trying to build a more balanced offense, right? So I don't think it's going to be like a Kevin Durant in the future. I know that's one of his idols and someone that he likes, but I just don't see him being that kind of guy because he's just so cerebral, and it's almost like a little Jokic and Marc Gasol in terms of I'm trying to be out there and make the best play. And I think the adjustment for him is figuring out when exactly to be aggressive and when to attack. Because I think when he gains more functional strength, he's already shown a willingness to go in there and bang and put his body into guys. So I think his speed and his length with a little bit more strength is going to make him pretty tough to deal with if you're closing out at the high post and he can blow by you, he can shoot over you, or he can pass in those situations.
Yeah, he looks super comfortable in the high post, and it's a great way to use his skills as a passer. And he's got like good touch, at least in that range. When I see him floating around like the 3-point line, I understand why he's taking those shots and why he's trying to build out that element of his game, but it doesn't look quite as natural as he does at like the foul line or the post. Even like he's got such great footwork and such great touch in close that I want to see him embrace that aspect of his game more than like turning into Anthony Davis, where AD will just like float and float and float. And you're like, dude, like you're great around the rim. Like, I don't know why you're addicted to these pull up jumpers. And so that's like the version of his game that I'm rooting for. But I think it's one of the most interesting parts of watching this year's Cavs is they are sort of figuring it out as they go. And Mobley, like, does he have like a go-to move and like a go-to version of like his offense? He doesn't yet, and it's going to be really cool to see him sort of like develop all of that.
Do you think that there is something that you feel like he can probably do already at this stage of his career that he's not doing yet? Like, is there something, especially in these games without Garland and LeVert, is there something you'd like to see him do more?
In the back of my mind, I wonder whether he would have an easier time turning into like a 20-point per game scorer if he were just playing the 5 full time and the game were easier for him that way. I think the Allen thing, it kind of cuts both ways, right? Because it does make him less likely to wear down and break down if he's playing the 4. And it also sort of forces him out of his comfort zone and could help him develop like a skill set that makes him even more dangerous 5 years from now when he's in the middle of his prime. But I also think that there are aspects of the game that would be easier if it were just him and he didn't have to worry about like finding his own little space in the defense to score and dominate. But I like the setup so much more than I thought I would. When we were coming into the season, I was like, you know what, man? Because I like in the draft, I texted you on draft night. I was like, yo, like the Cavs got the best player in the draft. Like this is a once in a lifetime win. And when they were coming into the season, I was like, man, oh man, I don't know why they are playing those two bigs together and making Evan Mobley's life harder than it needs to be. But it's actually worked like really well, and they have a good little like 2-man chemistry together. So I am definitely gonna wait and see what it turns into before I declare what Mobley needs.
Yeah, because I think even historically, like looking at Chris Bosh or Kevin Durant, like those power forwards that could close at center, I think there's going to be times down the road where you might have Mobley close at center. I like the fact that throughout this season they have had the second unit playing with Mobley at the 5, right, where he is functionally the backup 5, and they stagger a little bit with Allen, because I think those are really valuable opportunities for him. And you look at who they have in the second unit. If they were healthy, you got some juice around, right? Like even if going into next year, it's LeVert and Sexton playing together with Love and Mobley and whoever they have at the small forward position, like that's 2 combo guards, that's 2 bigs that you can run offense through. Like there's a lot of ways that you can get creative with that, and I'm interested to kind of explore what that can be. But in the meantime, like it's fun to at least have that base defense with Mobley and Allen, that just like throughout the season, it's so tough for teams to score on them. When Larry Markkanen's out there, that somehow has worked really, really well. But I do think largely from an offensive perspective, it's such a testament to how good Garland has been that he's made that pairing work. Because you look for the season, Mobley and Allen, when Garland is off the court, it's a 98.5 offensive rating. That's not great. On the court, it's 110.3, and it goes up to 114 when Lowry's out there too. So that has worked really, really well. And I think for Garland to find ways to get that kind of juice out of the offense before Mobley kind of develops his outside game and stretches the floor a little bit more before they have a proven shooter at the shooting guard position instead of Isaac Okoro for the majority of this year. Like, I think that's a real feather in his cap and something that speaks well to the upside of this team eventually.
Oh yeah, I mean absolutely, and we've talked too much about Mobley and Okoro and Jared Allen. I mean, at a baseline level, I'm here to celebrate Darius Garland, and I mean the things that he does well for this team. I always knew that his off the dribble shooting was going to make him special or gave him the chance to be special. But what I've loved watching this season is he's been excellent as a passer and also like excellent beyond his years at managing games and knowing sort of what the offense needs as they try to close some of these wins. And I mean, that just caught me like totally off guard. I just didn't see him turning the corner this quickly to becoming like a really steadying presence for this team. And I mean, as a fellow Garland believer, I believe like you and I were among the founders of Garland Island.
Oh yeah.
Like how
we
much
we were staking out a lot of real estate. We were sprucing up the place because we knew that it was going to be invaded at some point. But
we knew, but like, I mean, did we know? Like, were we worried at various points along the way? Because I loved the way he moved on the floor and was confident that eventually some of the other stuff would come. And part of it was like he needed to be healthy. And he needed to get more aggressive as a shooter.
Yeah.
But when he started the season slow and then had like an injury early on, yeah, I was like, oh boy.
Rolled his ankle within 3 minutes against Memphis. Like that was just the worst possible start. Like I don't think enough has been made of just how bad, like even though the Cavs played well in that stretch, like the fact that Garland missed games 2 and 3 of the season, Okoro got hurt, Love and Lowry got COVID early on. Like when people talk about the Cavs taking off after Sexton got hurt, that's one, not true because the winning percentage is basically the same. And two, it also ignores that they lost basically their entire rotation at various points in those first 11 games.
Difficult schedule. Like that whole stretch, it was like, well, they may be screwed by the time Garland gets back. And I was coming in like riding high off of, you know, Steph Curry hype over the summer, like saying Garland is like the star poised for a breakout or whatever. Mm-hmm. Like I was really believing, and then I suddenly like he got hurt, and I was like, oh man, like if it doesn't happen this year, it might be time to abandon Garland Island. And then
ye of little faith.
I know, man, it's great.
I was a complete zealot because I was so convinced that this could come that it was going to shake my confidence as someone that can evaluate basketball talent if this didn't work out. But yeah. I think one thing that I really like, and it's fitting that it's contrasted with Zion, like in his draft class, is the fact that he's really stepped up as a leader. Like when Evan Mobley went on the road tripping podcast at the start of the season, he said after he's drafted, one of the first calls he got was Garland, and Garland was forcing him to hang out and kind of getting him out of his comfort zone and spending time with him. And he said, we've like already grown into being really close friends off the court. Garland LeVert, when he got traded to the Cavs, first call Garland. Like he's always that guy that's reaching out, that seems to be really liked around by players around the league. Like you look at All-Star Weekend and these guys are all going up to him and talking to him, and they play the Spurs, and DeJounte Murray and him are hugging it out for like an hour after the game, and like he just seems to be one of those guys that people gravitate to. And I think that's what you want in a floor general. Like he might not be in the final version of this Cavs team, he might not be the best player on the team, but I have such confidence that he can fit with just about anybody in the league because of his ability to play on and off the ball. And there's a lot of parallels to Steph there, right? Where it just feels very scalable that from a team building perspective, having someone with the versatility that he has, with the temperament that he has, like I just feel it opens a lot of doors to just go out and acquire the best talent that's available, because I have confidence that he's going to be able to make that work.
Yeah, and that is the ultimate compliment, that you could trade for any other guard next to him and feel confident that Garland will be able to thrive either on or off the ball. And the personality stuff and the intangible stuff, that's sort of what I was alluding to earlier, where it's like you could tell his teammates love him and really look to him as like the leader on the floor. And that's a big deal, because that's one where it's impossible to tell whether that's there or not when you're in the middle of some of the hopeless seasons that the Cavs have had in years past. But as they're playing games that actually matter and they look at Garland and take him seriously as a leader and trust him, that's a really encouraging sign and makes me pretty excited about what this could turn into. You mentioned Zion. I had a completely ridiculous hypothetical to throw at you.
Okay.
Would you ever consider a Jared Allen plus all your assets plus Karis LeVert trade for Zion?
I would not.
Really?
I am, when you have a foundation like this, like the three guys I have confidence in, I am no longer feeling like you need to take a risky swing. Like I felt totally different about the prospect of adding Ben Simmons at the start of the year, when you're trying to find, okay, well, like what are the foundational pieces? Maybe we need to go take a gamble to bring in a high upside star. I don't feel that way anymore, where you have to take that kind of a risk. I didn't feel great about his body coming into the year. And I kind of feel like everyone has talked about does he want to go to the Knicks? Does he want to go to New Orleans stuff? Like, I feel there's probably valid reasons to that. But I also feel like that is a coping mechanism by NBA fans to just kind of ignore the fact that his body's been betraying him. And this is like a consistent trend. Like, it's too depressing to say, or it's easier to just say he wants to out of New Orleans and that's why this is all happening. When in reality, I think there's legitimate health concerns there. And I don't have a ton of confidence about his ability to stay on the court, because every time he does get hurt, just because of his size, like it takes him a while to get back into shape, and getting into the shape and rehabbing, like that takes a toll on the body. Like it's just, I just don't have a lot of confidence in it. And I think when you have an identity that the Cavs have now of being like this strong defensive team that, the personalities mesh well, like Jared Allen's a low key guy that wants to be in Cleveland. He gets along with Mobley, he gets along with Garland. I just wouldn't kind of risk that kind of chemistry this early in the team building process.
Okay, yeah. I mean, that's a responsible take and probably the right take. Of all,
and you're going to go reckless with this, aren't you?
No, I'm not. I'm not. Because I honestly don't know how I feel about Zion. I'm so glad that the Cavs didn't trade for Ben Simmons, because there was the first 6 weeks of the season, you could see that what the Cavs had was real. Mm-hmm. And then they would continue to be mentioned in the Ben Simmons trade roundup articles from Shams and Woj, and the Cavs would be one of 7 teams that were mentioned as potential suitors. Probably was never real, but was just, it freaked me out. The
Cavs feel like a very convenient leverage team right now. Like for Ben Simmons, it would make sense that those type of rumors would be out there, because they're an up and coming team that has so many assets outside of their core. Like it's believable that they could go out and get a disgruntled player. It made a lot of sense over the weekend for LeBron to kind of use the Cavs as a boogeyman and scare the Lakers into action and guarantee that he's getting a big round of applause in Cleveland. Like it's funny to see that the Cavs are like a plausible leverage team in trade talks, because there's an understanding that, if someone does hit the market and the Cavs want to pull the trigger, they probably have the assets available to make a competitive offer.
Yeah. Well, and to me, it was are you guys watching the Cavs? Like, why would you break this up to bring in Simmons? Like, have you watched Simmons for the last 3 years? Like, he's not worth that kind of gamble. And like, there was real momentum. And with the LeBron stuff, I mean, I definitely look at what they are building now. And the odds that LeBron comes and it works and it's all worth it, feel pretty long to me right now. And like the LeBron return in 2015, like the Cavs lived the best possible version of that story. And if I were like a diehard Cavs fan, I would be like, look, we're always going to be grateful to LeBron, but I don't want to do that again. And I'm really enjoying like what this team has turned into, and let's see where it goes.
Like, I just have too much respect for the amount of experience it takes to go out there and win in the NBA. Like, I don't think they're a LeBron away from winning a championship. And I think that has to factor into any decision making if you're looking at a trade to give up your ability to trade future picks and that sort of thing. It doesn't feel worthwhile to me. Now that I have you separated from Ben, I do need to ask. Do you think Ben has any regrets about his hard Garland stance? Because Gulliver is not someone that is ever going to change his mind on a player. Like, he's going to keep his take in place. He's done. I mean, if he's not going to change his mind for Joel Embiid, he's not going to change it for Darius Garland. But Garland feels like such a Gulliver player. Do you think in the back of his mind he regrets taking such an anti-Garland stance?
Well, first of all, I think he will update his analysis. He's already softened on Garland. It's been nice to see him evolve. Ben Simmons is a player who jumps to the forefront of my mind when I think of Ben doing like 180s on guys. It took him a while, but eventually he was just like entirely out on Simmons. So I think Garland, what you would have to see from Garland in order to see like a full-on 180 from Grandpa Gulliver, you need the playoff success. I think Devin Booker won over a lot of people with the playoff success, and now everyone's sort of made peace with the idea that he's like a perennial all-NBA guy, whereas last year, even as the Suns were winning like 55 games or whatever they actually won, everybody was looking at Devin Booker was like, I don't know, is he really an all-star? Like, how much is he really contributing to winning? And like, I'm not sure if I put him in that elite tier of guards. And I mean, it was ridiculous at the time, but like he had to go do it in the playoffs before he won everyone over. And Garland, I think, is going to be a similar situation. For whatever reason, he doesn't have the like mass appeal among the NBA intelligentsia that Ja Morant does. Like, Ja is a great player in his own right. I'm not here to hate on Ja, but when I think about like what wins at the highest level, I do look at Garland's skill set, and I feel like he's going to have a better chance to really excel. Whereas I think Ja, there may be a ceiling there.
It's the Chris Paul, Darren Williams thing, you know, long game. Garland is the Chris Paul.
We have always been playing the long game, Justin. I don't know where Carter has been on the Garland believer spectrum.
There was a period of time where that man was very concerned that he was just going to be DJ Augustine, who the Cavs should add as a buyout player if that's an option. But there was some doubt. There was definitely doubt there, and I was a big believer in the flashes.
It was scary with Garland early on. He just looked so much smaller than everyone on the floor.
Yeah.
That I began to wonder, like, well, his skills are great and should translate to a star level guard, but maybe he's just 2 inches too small to really excel offensively. And thankfully, after a few years here, he's proven those doubts wrong. But
It was fun. I should have bugged Gulliver more. When I checked into my hotel, the media hotel there for the weekend, after I left, the first person I saw in the hallway was Gulliver, because he was getting on. He was staying on my floor, and I was like, absolutely yes. I'm like, of all the celebrities, of all the people I saw, like that was the one that got me really excited, because I was talking to him, and it's just the full Gulliver experience at all times. Like, he comes across like no one makes being a dick more endearing than Ben Golliver, and I cannot. I just appreciate it so much. He's just on all the time, and that was a lot of fun. So I'm interested to see how his Garland takes evolve, because I feel like it takes more to earn his love and respect as a player than it does to hurt him, and I think that's what Ben Simmons was he offended his basketball senses and sensibilities, and that's not something that he will ever take lightly.
Yeah, I think with Simmons, it was the complete refusal to address any of the weaknesses in his game for like 5 years in a row. Eventually, Golliver just threw up his hands and was like, all right, I'm out. I want no part of this stock. And yes, I would say affable dickishness is why our podcast works. It's definitely like he can be kind of mean, but he's also hilarious, and it's not mean spirited. All of that is like crucial to the GOAT formula as far as I'm concerned.
It's just so funny that the guy that gets up at 4:30 to experience sunsets and is spending all his free time in national parks and building Lego and all that good stuff is also a big city snob at times. Like, I just don't know how to square one of those things with the other.
Oh my God. I mean, don't ever get him started on New York City. That's one of his least favorite places in the entire world. And I go to New York and I'm like, it's great to be here. Like, I love a couple days in New York. There's nothing better. And Ben is just like, oh my God, get me out of here. So
I like it at times, but that's a lot of people. That is way more people than I ever need in one space.
Yeah, and it would definitely be kind of brutal to live in New York. So it's a great place to visit. I feel the same way about Los Angeles. Great place to visit. Living there is inconvenient for a bunch of different reasons. But yeah, now we're far afield here. But
no kidding.
I'm curious, talking All-Star, what was your favorite part of that experience? I'm sure it was pretty wild to go through all of it and go through all of it in Cleveland.
It was I mean, just the reception from kind of the fans and people around Cleveland was really cool. Like the fact that we get recognized, I think it helps that we're on YouTube every now and then and people know what we look like. But that was really cool. But just also how surreal it was that like the storybook Cavs just hit every narrative standpoint. Like, it doesn't matter if it's Rising Stars or skills competition or the game itself with Jared Allen making Joel Embiid work and Garland playing well. Like, every single event they were in, they won. And you kind of got that signature moment, whether it's Evan Mobley fulfilling his Chris Bosh role of hitting the half court shot. Bosh used to be the half court expert in the skills contest. So that was all just so much damn fun. So that was definitely cool to see.
Yeah, I mean, it's pretty wild that it has all worked out as well as it has for the Cavs, and it all coincided with that weekend. I'm glad that like Garland and Mobley got a chance to be celebrated, and Jared Allen with his where was his outfit from? It was like Old Navy or something.
I don't know, but I felt personally attacked by people dragging that outfit because that is my signature look. Like, what's going on here?
It's like a good like adult casual look. I felt bad for Jared Allen for the exact same reasons, and unfortunately, I think the reality is that like the three of us are not that cool, but all of it just makes Jared Allen more endearing. So,
well, once again, like and when you talk about the Zion, I won't call it a possibility, but like that hypothetical, it does seem like the Cavs have really emphasized bringing in a certain type of player, right? Like someone that they feel confident will want to be a part of the Cavs culture, be there long term. And Jared Allen, Garland, Okoro, Sexton, Mobley, like they're all these low key guys that get along so well with one another. And I just think that that's such a special kind of thing to put together. And that has to be part of the decision making when you're looking at who to acquire. And part of why I have long pined for guys like Brandon Ingram, who's also a pretty low key guy, or Jaylen Brown or DeJounte Murray. And again, it's one of those things where the benefit of having Garland is when you're looking to add players, like, you're never going to get a perfect option on the trade market, right? Like, or in free agency, you're going to have to make some compromises. And I think they're in a good position that if the best player available for a consolidation type move is a point guard or like a big point guard, they can probably do that because you've already seen proof of concept that Garland worked alongside Ricky Rubio, even though he wasn't shooting well from three, even though he wasn't finishing well at the rim, just having that ball handler worked. So if the best available player is a point guard, you can do that. If it's a shooting guard, you obviously feel great about that. If it's a small forward, perfect. That's the dream scenario. But I do think that there's just so much flexibility with this Cavs core that it opens up a lot of interesting options. Even if it's a big shooting guard that normally can't play small forward, you probably feel good about it with Mobley and Allen because they managed to make Lowry work at small forward.
Yeah, and that's why I was asking about Zion to put all my cards on the table. There's a little voice in the back of my head that says, in the same way that Garland affords you flexibility in the backcourt, Mobley, the best version of him, is going to be so good defensively that you can get away with guys who would kill other teams' defenses. And Zion, in addition to all the injuries, the reason I wouldn't want to trade for him if I were almost any other team that had like viable alternatives, is because like it's just going to be so hard to build a really good defense around him that like I just don't know if it's going to be worth like 5 to 7 years of team building if A, you can't count on him to stay healthy, and B, if you don't have a big man who's good on defense, like that puts a ceiling on what you can accomplish as a team.
Mm-hmm.
Now, Mobley is so good, though, that you could slide him at the 5 and put Zion next to him, and maybe you get away with it. And maybe that's the way forward.
If he played some defense to this point of his career, because he was supposed to be such a great defensive player, and that might be a boomer ass take there, but like he just hasn't been the kind of player that I thought he would be.
Yeah. I mean, like watching him at Duke, he was like Draymond-ish on defense.
Yeah.
The way he flew all over the floor, he could guard multiple positions. He was a shot blocker. Like there was a lot to get excited about that side of the floor with Zion, and that side of the floor has been like a complete zero through the first few years of his career. And really, like he's taken things off the table down in New Orleans. And so, yeah, I think you had the right responsible answer on that one. The Cavs have too many good things going for them right now. Trading for Zion would be crazy. And unfortunately, I think Ingram, another of my favorites.
I don't see that being possible. I don't see him or Jalen being possible. My one like crazy trade machine type thing with Jalen would be if Boston ever did want to pull the Bradley Beal deal off. I think the Cavs could send a lot of assets to Washington instead and then get Jalen in. That would be my dream scenario. But I think adding Derek White was such a savvy move for Boston. It sets them up to actually do proper team building around Jalen and Jason. So actually that kind of ties into the question I want to ask you. I want to get your power rankings of the kind of your top 5 in the Eastern Conference, because I think there's such a shift after this trade deadline. Obviously, big names shifting around. Boston's playing really well. Milwaukee looks a little shaky. Kind of want to get your sense of who you actually have confidence in going into the playoffs.
It's a really tough question right now. And there's so many variables, starting with Garland. Like if Garland is going to be healthy and is like, and not just healthy, like he's going to play, but like I want him at like 100%. And I don't know whether it's going to be possible to see that version of Garland on a regular basis over the next couple of months. So the Cavs are not in my top 5 because of that variable. Now, if you,
I wouldn't have them in mind right now, anyways. Either.
It's hard because I was just about ready to put them in that tier like a couple weeks ago. Like I think after their win over Milwaukee, I was looking at them and thinking, you know what? They are going to be a huge pain in the ass to match up with no matter who they end up playing in the playoffs. And like, we need to take this Cavs team seriously this year. And I'm not sure that's true if Garland isn't going to be like cranking on all cylinders. So that aside, top 5, I really like the Heat,
Hmm.
and it's gonna be hard to pick anyone but Miami to come out of the East. As crazy as that sounds, they've been
No,
kind of
I'm on the same boat, man. Like I feel like they have such a coaching advantage over the rest of the top five in the Eastern Conference. Like I think Spo is considerably better than Doc or Budenholzer or Ime. Like I have so much confidence in Spo, and that team has so much experience as well.
yeah. Are you confident in Tyler Harrow?
Not really.
Mm,
I just don't know how good he needs to be. Like I think Bam is so good, Lowry's good, Butler's good, and I just feel like they're going to have enough either way. They might need Hero to go off in a series or two, and I think that's probably the right role for him.
yeah.
And that's the role he's in. So I even though I'm not the biggest Hero fan on the planet, like he's been legitimately good this season, and with Kevin Love dropping off recently, I think that's probably locking up six man of the year for Hero.
Yeah, and I to me, I think Jimmy Butler isn't quite as good as people think, and Tyler Harrow is a little bit better than people think.
Hmm.
And the Miami ceiling is contingent upon Harrow, and I do believe that he can be like the scorer they need off the bench and in the mid range at the end of games. Like he's going to be pretty valuable for them. Or if it doesn't come from Hero, then they're probably screwed because I don't know if Jimmy still has it in him to like carry a playoff offense for 3 or 4 rounds.
Yeah.
And Bam, I'm not sure he's is there yet either. So in any event, the Heat are number one for me. The Bucks probably should be number one, but I don't know. I mean, where are you at on Milwaukee right now?
I have so much confidence in their big three, and I feel like Middleton is probably coasting. If he's not coasting and this is just an Olympic hangover, I think they're probably going to be a second round out.
Mm,
But if Ibaka can have some life, or maybe Lopez comes back and those guys are clicking on all cylinders, I think Milwaukee's going to be fine. I'd probably put them number two. And some of that is just and I, some of this comes from Cavs fans' year past perspective. When you're the defending champs, I will give you the benefit of the doubt that you can flip the switch, and
yeah.
I think that that is a team that is probably understanding what it takes to get to a championship now. They have that experience. They've been through multiple playoff runs, and I have a level of confidence in there. And Giannis is, I mean, he's freaking Giannis. Like I think he's probably the best player in the league right now. Embiid, I would give the MVP to this year, but I
Yeah.
still think Giannis is probably the best player in the league.
Giannis is so good, and it hurts me to pick, Miami above Giannis. But I do think even as dominant as Giannis was last year, they still needed Middleton to come through and hit like Hall of Fame type daggers for them on
And
several different occasions. And like,
and,
if he
and
doesn't get
Bud still
nothing,
hasn't won me over. I'm still a Bud skeptic.
I am too. I am too. Watching Saturday night, Bud versus the Nets down the stretch, I'm like, ugh, you really ran a play to get Bobby Portis a corner three.
That was
LT.
not an encouraging game for Milwaukee.
Eh.
That definitely has influenced this conversation a little bit for me. Like some skepticism's creeping in, but at the end of the day, I'm still going to give them the benefit of the doubt. Partly is some of this also has to do with the fact I just don't necessarily trust a lot of these other teams. Like Philadelphia, I think is very good, but big game James, man. Like I think you and I are in the same boat where we have more concerns about Harden sinking that ship in the playoffs than truly leading them to a title.
Yeah, I mean, I have to go watch the second half of Knicks Sixers later this afternoon, and
Living the
so
dream.
I'll have a more definitive Harden on the Sixers take then. But for now, I do not buy the Sixers as like legit contenders out of the East. I think Harden
In
has been.
related news, the Knicks are only down two in the third.
Oh, there you go. Well, I mean, look, Harden has been a fraud year after year after year after year in the playoffs. And everybody's like, oh, they're going to generate so many free throws. Well, guess what? That number is going to be cut in half when the playoffs start. And they're going to
Yeah.
have to figure out how to work together in the half court. And I just think it's more complicated in reality than it seems like it would be when you look at these guys on paper. And Embiid's health is also a reason to be a little cautious before like buying all the way in on that team. So
Yeah.
my third team, think I'm going to go with the Brooklyn Nets, which is crazy, but man, oh man, put Kevin Durant back in there. And if they get the 7th seed and end up with the Bulls in the first round, I see them winning that series. And then like, they're as scary as anybody. And you know what's crazy about the Nets? Andre Drummond, Cavs fans know better than anybody.
I'm still a believer in Drummond helping. I think Curry and Drummond going to Brooklyn legitimately made a big difference, and all the credit in the world to Kevin Durant to understand that he can't win without Curry and going out and getting him.
Yeah, no kidding, man. And Drummond, I'm toying with this take. He may be more valuable than Ben Simmons in Brooklyn, and it could actually tip the scales in the East.
As a take connoisseur, I appreciate what you're doing there. I don't know if I'll go that far, but I do think he makes a legitimate difference. Like you look at that game against Milwaukee, and he is capable of contributing. He is someone that can put up significant numbers, and at least like just his physical presence is something that you have to deal with. So I think Curry and Irving work really well together. I think Drummond helps a lot, and if you're getting anything out of Simmons, like you're probably in pretty good shape. If I'm the Nets, I'd probably wish I had Joe Harris, and I would feel a little bit better. But at the end of the day, it's Kevin Durant with that amount of help. I think they are as scary as anybody in the Eastern Conference.
Yeah, well, and Cavs fans are some of the only people in the NBA intelligentsia who still have respect for Kyrie Irving and respect for what Kyrie could do in the playoffs. And that's another factor that I wouldn't discount with Brooklyn.
Yep.
Like they're a team that's going to be a handful in a 7-game series. And it's a difficult line for me to walk because I'm such a Simmons hater that like, I'm not going to factor him into any of this. But
there's so little he has to do, though. Like that's the thing that jumps out to me, where I think this is the perfect situation for him, because the conversation is always going to be on Durant and Irving, right? Like it's some people might scapegoat him to some extent, but I think he's in an ideal situation for him.
Yeah, I agree. This is if he's going to succeed anywhere, it's going to be a situation like this. And I'm not sure there was another situation like this across the league. So against all odds, the Rich Paul power play worked out great for Ben Simmons. The fourth team would be the Boston Celtics.
Or Philly.
Yeah.
I'm liking this Sixers hate. I'm liking it.
I'm sorry.
I wouldn't do it. I would put Philly over Boston, but I'm appreciative of the art of the take here.
I can't help it. I just do not have faith in Philly once the playoffs get here. And the Celtics are another team that is going to be a handful when you get to the playoffs. The question with them is, do you believe in Jason Tatum? I'm not sure I do.
Wow.
I mean, I don't know. Where are you?
10-time Tatum slander here. Like that's unbelievable. I still think Boston is like a real point guard away from competing, and the part of what I like getting Derek White is I think it sets them up in the future to, like trade Marcus Smart and some first round picks and get someone that can actually distribute. And I think White fits really well alongside that. And Robert Williams, I think, is a really good player. Like there's just a few too many questions at the point guard and center position for them, but I do think that they're legitimate. And I was confident in the past that the Cavs could beat Boston in a series. I'm no longer feeling that confident because I just think they're that disruptive defensively. And when you look at kind of the unknowns from a playmaking perspective with the Cavs, so I'm not feeling too great about that matchup anymore.
Interesting. Yeah. I mean, I would pick the Celtics in a Celtics-Cavs series, and with Tatum, I think what I mean is, like, obviously he's an all-star, and I would say he's probably an all-NBA type guy as well at this point. But like, the question I have going forward is, you know how they say like you need one of the top 7 or 8 guys to have a real shot at a title.
Yeah.
Is Tatum going to be one of those top 7 or 8 guys? And is he that dominant? And I think it's still an open question at this point.
Yeah, I don't know if I even have a strong take one way or the other on that. Like, guess it remains to be seen. I definitely think he's someone you can win with in the right situation. Boston is just, they're a weird team because they're very good. There's things that they do well, but I just don't know if they have that guy that is the guy, and I don't know what easy route there is for that. So, am I safe assuming that your number 5's Philly?
The number 5 is Philly, and
Okay.
And then I have a question for you. Of those 5 teams, which would you want the Cavs to play in a first round series?
My God. I don't think there's a great answer because, like, I don't want to play against Embiid. I don't want to play against Giannis. I think I'd actually like to see Milwaukee if I had to pick one of those 5 because there wouldn't be the expectations that the Cavs could pull off an upset, but it would be like just a really interesting measuring stick series. I think Miami, depending on kind of how things go for them the rest of the season, I think that would be if you're like looking to win a series. As much as I have a ton of confidence in them, I do think that the Cavs are kind of uniquely suited to bother them with their length and kind of what they can do to limit Bam. I don't know. Boston's the least intimidating, but at the same time, just their defense kind of freaks me out. So I was actually going to ask you, if you were the Cavs, would you rather like fall to 6 and play Chicago in the first round, or would you rather be the 4 seed and play either Boston or Toronto in the 4-5 matchup? Like, would you punt on home court just to give yourself a chance to play Chicago? Because to me, Chicago's the team that stands out. Chicago and Toronto are the 2 teams that I am like holding on to hope that
it's winnable.
We can do that. We can do that. There's still some demons in Toronto, and Toronto's looked a little shaky. I think they've lost their last 2 games by like a combined 70 points or something to that effect. I feel like Chicago and Toronto are the 2 teams with the most areas that the Cavs can exploit.
Oh man, I mean, the reason I was laughing as you were explaining that is because like Chicago is taking so much disrespect from all these different fans imagining their playoff scenarios. Like on the last GOAT podcast, Ben and I were talking about the East playoff picture, and the Bulls were still the 1st seed at this point, and I was like, do you think the Nets would tank their opening play-in game to get a matchup with the Bulls? And it's like, it's not necessarily disrespect to the Bulls as much as it's like a reflection of how rock solid the Heat and the Bucks and the Sixers, even like all those teams are going to be scary as hell. And the Bulls, like,
they have no positive playoff experience is how I should frame it, because DeRozan has been historically bad there. Vucevic, I mean, he not exactly someone that moves the needle in the playoffs. Ball, Levine, Caruso's had experience, but out of these options, they seem the most vulnerable, but they're a really good team. DeRozan is in the MVP conversation. Like, there is no real weak link in the Eastern Conference, and even if you're in the play-in, like, you lose that first game of the play-in and you have to play one of Atlanta or Charlotte. Like, if Charlotte goes off in a 1-game setting and scores 150 points, I could see them beating a Toronto, or if things go really poorly, Brooklyn. Like,
really?
In a one game setting, that I think they can get enough firepower up if it's just a bad game. Like, let's say Simmons never really integrates and he's not playing well. Kyrie has an off night, or Durant doesn't have an off night. Like, I would not pick them. I would say there's like a 99% chance, but I could see them putting up that number of points. They've been one of the most explosive teams in the league on certain nights.
Yeah. Yeah, well, I hope that Billy Donovan has some video coordinator putting together like an 8-hour supercut of different podcasts disrespecting the Bulls over the last 6 weeks, and certainly the next 6 weeks. I mean, nobody expects anything from the Bulls. My answer to your original question, though, I would want to play the Raptors first if I were the Cavs. So
Raptors in a 4-5. Okay.
Yeah, wherever I have to be to make that happen, I would seek out the Raptors and the Bulls. If you sink down to 6th and end up with the Bulls, I think that's a great outcome as well. They're going to have to fight hard to stay out of the 7 and 8 spot here. Especially as some of these other teams in the East come together, like they're going to have their work cut out for them. But like I said at the top, as far as I'm concerned, there are no bad outcomes for this Cavs season, given what we've seen thus far. The Bucks would be an interesting measuring stick for Mobley and Allen and what that front court can do going forward. I'll tell you this much. My friend Ben Thompson, a Bucks maniac.
A legend in the Twitter streets.
Yeah, and he's pretty freaked out by what the Cavs' length can do to the Bucks' offense. I mean, obviously, Bucks enter that series, they're going to be favored, and they'll almost certainly win. But I do think the Cavs can make it more interesting than a lot of people would expect.
It's funny you say that because I actually talked to Ben. We were DMing back and forth, and he was basically saying it feels like an inverse of Cavs Bucks in the past, where like Cavs fans were like, hey, this Milwaukee team's up and coming. We see like how this can be really bothersome. I remember being nervous about like Giannis on LeBron and Middleton on Kyrie. Like what could that team do? And thank God Eric Bledsoe was around to tank those teams in the past. But it's nice to see kind of the circle of life where Milwaukee fans are taking the Cavs seriously and are worried about the long-term future there. I don't think I'm betraying any confidences here, but my buddy Giancarlo Navas from the Heat Beat was saying Cavs are like one of the teams he doesn't want to see Miami play because he's worried about what they can do to neutralize Bam and kind of what the Cavs' length can do. So I give both those teams a nod, but it's nice. It's nice to at least hear that kind of praise because it's not about this year for the Cavs. Like you look back at last year and they were in that play-in hunt and just lost a bunch of those games. And I still think that was positive experience. It sure didn't stop Garland and Allen from making the leap. I think they're better suited now to go out and be competitive. I mean, you look at the 1 to 2 week timeline for Caris LeVert, and 1 week, I'm hoping it's 1 week because 1 week means that he might be back for Charlotte, which would be great. But if they can get healthy down the stretch, these like 2 games they have against Toronto, like the games against Chicago, Milwaukee, like Philadelphia, 3 games against Philly, like those are really going to be important for the play-in because not only for just how much it counts in the standings, but you win another game against Toronto, you have the tiebreaker on them for the season because you're 2-0 against them for the regular season. So that puts a good amount of space if you win those games against Toronto in avoiding the play-in and maybe limiting your worst case scenario to being the 6th seed.
Well, and my request at the end of this podcast is over the next like month or so, as things get stressful and you take some rough losses and fans start lashing out on Twitter, you need to be the voice of the fan base and remind people that it could be worse and you could be the Washington Wizards. Okay? You've got like Heat writers and Bucks Twitter people reaching out being like, I don't know if we want to play the Cavs. Like, what an incredible place to be. The Wizards rebuild is still like, I would say probably 4 years away from hitting that point. I mean, the Wizards don't even realize they're rebuilding at this point. So like there's several different stages we need to get through to get to where the Cavs are. And you guys are at like ground zero of what could turn into a pretty cool era here. I was already excited about Garland, and throwing Mobley in the mix really takes it to the next
so
level.
Fun.
It's just going to be awesome. And so don't let any grumpy fans lose sight of how cool this is.
Yeah, that's basically where I'm at. Like, I'm disappointed with some of these individual games, and I don't want to let this team off the hook and be like, well, they're just missing their guards. I think the guys they have are more than capable of winning games against Detroit and Washington and maybe even Minnesota. I hope Garland's back from Minnesota. We'll keep our fingers crossed. I was checking my score app and it said it was a game time decision, not ruled out yet. So hoping that remains the case. But if they make their path a little more difficult down the stretch, I still think that's really valuable experience. And I don't think anything that occurs the rest of the season changes the long-term outlook of this team. So it's a good place to be in. They've earned some elevated expectations, and we'll see if they rise to the occasion. I mean, I think one of the worst things about kind of the debate culture that's infiltrated sports is we've made winning and losing like a character flaw, where it's like, oh, they lose because they just don't have winner mentality and all that, where, I mean, you look historically, you keep failing until you eventually break through and make adjustments through internal development. I mean, the Cavs didn't make a lot of personnel changes coming into this season. A lot of this came from internal growth, and as good as Evan Mobley's been, him kind of connecting the dots and filling in certain lineups wouldn't be as impactful if Darius Garland and Jared Allen didn't make the leaps that they made. So I still think they're in a very, very good position moving forward, no matter what happens this season.
Yeah, it's going to be really exciting to watch them grow together. And there's something, in the new NBA that everyone is so transaction obsessed that they're constantly trying to add additional pieces. And granted, I've had conversations with you where I'm like, the Cavs need to put everything on the table to get Brandon Ingram and whatever. But at the same time, it's cool to see a couple young guys who love being where they are and are excited to grow up together, and to watch that come together over the next few years is going to be very exciting.
Absolutely. I mean, there's just not a lot of winning in the NBA before you're 25, 26. It just doesn't happen. So what they do over these next couple of years and the way that they learn and adjust from failures is going to be really interesting. But Andrew, thank you so much for coming on, man. It's always so much fun to get to shoot the shit with you and talk about the Cavs. And I was hopeful that this would be coming off a big Garland game and we could just celebrate it. But I do think getting kind of the outsider's perspective as we're kind of in this weird little unknown period for the Cavs where guys are out of the lineup, I do think that there's definitely a value to that.
Yeah, man. Well, we'll have to do another State of the Cavs podcast. Maybe after free agency, I can come back on and we can assess where we are and where things are headed. Hopefully we can get Carter back in the mix for that. But
yeah, that guy just he's always bailing. He thinks his day job is so important. Making money, supporting his family. It's just, who does this guy think he is?
This is why he's only a part-time resident on Garland Island. And,
yeah, it's true.
We will allow him to hang out time and again, but
he's got an anchored yacht just off the coast of Garland Island where he just kind of stays. Actually, hang on. Before I get you out, because you are a lawyer, I need to ask, does Kevin Love blocking Thomas Bryant into the floor nullify his contract? Does that trigger the amnesty clause? What happens there? Because that was one wild play.
I will tell you this much. I am so tired of watching Thomas Bryant for the Wizards that I hope it nullifies the contract. I'd have to examine the language to give you a definitive answer, but I would love to take 4 or 5 hours and find a way for the Wizards to get out of the Thomas Bryant contract. So, yes, I hope that Kevin Love blocked him out of the NBA on behalf of all Wizards fans. I
could not believe him getting up and just kind of guiding him to the floor through the ball. That was certainly something. But Andrew, thank you so much for coming on. To all our listeners, make sure you're checking out the Greatest of All Talk. The GOAT Pod is the GOAT for a reason. I love listening to you and Ben. I don't miss an episode. And as I said, it's the only podcast I pay for. So thank you so much. To all our listeners, if you're listening to this via podcast, make sure you leave a rating, leave a review, subscribe, unsubscribe, resubscribe, and help cook those books. If you want to be part of Chase Down's exclusive Discord chat, you can send a screenshot of that review to chasedownpod@gmail.com. However you guys choose to support us, we really do appreciate it. Make sure you guys are staying safe out there. And until next time, go Cavs.